Welcome to Season 9, Episode 54 of the Be Conscious podcast. Today, I am pleased to interview LaTasha Brown, the host of the video podcast, Good Grief with Auntie Bird. Listen in as LaTasha shares her journey through tremendous grief and how she now bravely uses her creativity to explore grief in its many forms, sharing stories that empower others to do the same. Here we go.
Welcome to the Be Conscious podcast, the show that brings you enlightened perspectives on the frequency of money, life's many challenges, and those heavy feelings that may be holding you back from living your best life. And now your host, Dr. Susan Nicholas.
Now, before I move ahead with my interview with LaTasha, we're going to talk a lot about grief, but we're also going to talk about mindset. And if you're on a spiritual path and really looking to elevate your mindset and change your perspectives, what's really important is mental clarity. On my conscious journey, I've had to really change everything about how I live, whether it's what I put in my body, what I drink, how I think, and what I believe. And one of the things that I have been so fortunate to find is Magic Mind, the 2-ounce mental performance shot that is full of clean organic ingredients and really gets you past that 2 p.m. slump in the middle of the day when you feel like, when you feel unproductive, like you just want to take a nap and the mental fog sets in. Now, what I love about Magic Mind is that when I take it in the morning, I feel clear mentally the entire day. Like I can get through the entire day without those fluctuations in my energy and mental clarity. Now, I'm a clean water and green tea drinker, so I don't really get that boost of caffeine. But if you do and if you like it, Magic Mind is a great companion. But if you're anything like me and want to keep it clean and simple, give Magic Mind a shot. You won't regret it. Now let's get back to our conversation with LaTasha Brown. LaTasha is an entrepreneur, event producer, actress, connector, and podcast host. She has worked in radio for companies like Radio One, Cumulus Broadcasting, Damn Right Originals, and Comedy Central. After the unexpected loss of her parents, LaTasha turned to what she knew best, creativity. She launched and now hosts a podcast called Good Grief with Auntie Bird, where she explores the different faces of grief and how it shows up in our daily lives. LaTasha, welcome to the Be Conscious podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Susan. Thank you.
You know, it is, I would say, a distinct honor to have you on the show. After we met in Atlanta at the podcast summit, I just had this feeling that you would help so many people sharing your journey and then how you are transforming the energy, I would say, of grief into creative efforts. And I have to say, I was deeply, deeply moved by your podcast.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah, it was so brave.
Thank you.
And so raw. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just wanted to give you the hugest hug. And I'm sure that that type of feeling is felt by many who have seen your show and who will.
Yeah. Did you end up seeing the first episode?
Yes, I did.
Yes, that was a really tough one.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
it was like a
one.
good hard, like when you,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. So I wanted to start this interview out by you sharing with us a little bit about your life. And if you're open to it, what was leading up to the loss of your parents? And it seemed like they left this plane, I would say, um, close together.
Yeah.
And that was a really big pill to swallow.
Yeah.
And so if you wouldn't mind, or if you're open to sharing kind of what was leading up to that? What was life like? And like what happened?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's a catalyst for what you're doing now.
Yeah. So honestly, everything was great. Like my parents weren't like sickly or anything.
Mhm.
Of course, like they weren't that old. My parents were like 60, 59, 60.
Mhm.
Um, but like nobody was ill, nobody had cancer, nobody, so both of my parents' deaths were extremely unexpected.
Mhm.
Extremely unexpected. So December 2021, like right after Christmas, maybe like the 28th, I remember my mom calling us and telling us like that she ended up having COVID or whatever. So we were all like, "Oh man, mom, you got COVID." Not necessarily making light of it,
Mhm.
but I don't want to say we weren't taking it seriously. But everybody was like, "Okay, well, do the normal thing, quarantine, get rest, or whatever." So the 2 weeks passed. And she was good. Like she was good. I called her, asked her how she was doing, went over there, checked on her. She was really good. Um, and then maybe like a day or two later, my dad called me and was like, "Hey, can you come over and check on your mom? Your mom's kind of acting a little foggy." So I went over there, and like every time my mom got sick or got a cold, she was kind of dramatic,
Mhm.
So when I went over there, she was like a little. It was like a little foggy, but it also felt very familiar. Like, okay, mommy, like, are you good? And she was responding like, yeah, girl, I'm good. Like, are you good? I was like, okay, just get some rest and, just talking to her
Mhm.
normal.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the next day, my dad called me again and was like, hey, like, I think something's wrong with your mom. Like, could you come over here and check on her one more time? So I went over there the next day, and this is when I knew like something was wrong. So my mom she was very like girly, womanly. Like she never let my dad see her without her hair done, and like
Mhm.
she kept her
Mhm.
nails done. She kept herself up. She kept her appearance up. And when I went over there, it wasn't like it was. I was like, hold on, something's wrong. Like she usually have a nice wig on. She didn't have her wig on. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, and she was acting very spacey.
Okay.
So I was like, wait, okay, something is definitely wrong, right? So in my head, I just assumed like, okay, this could be early stage dementia, like I'm trying to jump to different conclusions. And I also know that COVID gives people brain fog as well.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
was like, okay, well, maybe this is brain fog. She ended up getting tested for COVID and she didn't have it. Um, they said that she didn't have it. So when I went over there, I was like, okay, well, mommy, let's go to the, doctor. So I remember having her like trying to get her to walk to the car, and she was tired, like she couldn't walk to the car. And I was what is happening right now?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so I had to wheel her to the car. Long story short, I ended up taking her to Emory, in the hospital, and my mom used to work for Emory, so I took her to the hospital, and let her know what's going on. And while she's there, while we're in the emergency room, she's very conscious. She knows what's happening, So they were like, okay, we're gonna keep her a little bit, and I explained to them what was going on. So the next day they called us and was like, hey, Miss Brown, she's okay. Um, they were like, we did test her again for COVID, and she ended up having COVID again. And we were like, oh, okay. They were like, but she's doing really good or whatever. She's acting crazy and, making jokes because my mom's very funny and making
Mhm.
jokes in the hospital. And long story short, maybe 2 days later, because they ended up keeping it, they told us like, oh, well, your mom had a heart attack and we had to resuscitate her. And we were like, wait, what's going on?
Right.
Like,
Like
and
back up the truck. Like,
yeah, we were like,
yeah.
wait, what are you saying? And
Mhm.
then in a matter of 11 days, basically, like she was gone. So all of it happened so sudden and so unexpected. It like,
Mm.
yeah, like they said like I guess the COVID attacked her kidneys or something, which was causing her brain to fog. Once your
Mhm.
organs, basically her organs
Failing.
were,
Yeah.
were failing her. So that whole thing was like, wait, what just happened? When I dropped her off at the
Right, right.
hospital, I'm thinking like, oh, this is just something very small. Death was never a thought to us, like at all. And my parents
Mhm.
were married for 38 39 years. They've been
Mhm.
together since they were 20, so they
Mhm.
grew up
Mhm.
together. So that happened and it crushed our entire family because it's the beginning of the year. My
Mhm.
mom died on January 17th, 2022. So it's right at the beginning of the new year. And we're having to experience everything first without her, and then
Right.
having to, navigate all of these emotions that, especially the kids, like we've never felt before. Like, what is happening? What's going on? and
Mhm.
and also take care or try to assist my dad in whatever ways. So we're getting through this, not even getting through it. I think like all of us were very depressed, very, very depressed. And then December 1st comes, and um well, I'll back up just to add a little bit more detail to the story. So I was in a pilot. I got cast for a pilot in June or whatever. I'm on autopilot at this moment, but I got cast for a pilot in June. And on December 2nd, they were supposed to do. We were scheduled to do an Atlanta screening.
Mhm.
So my parents lived in College Park. So I had to go pick up the director from the airport on December 1st. So I was like, oh, well, let me. I was like an hour and a half early. I was like, okay, well, let me go and check on my dad. And I had been with my dad the whole week prior to that. And I was like, okay, well, let me go and check on my father. Or sit with him for a little bit before I go to the airport to get the director. And I was calling him, he didn't answer. I saw his car parked, so I had my key unlock the door. And when I went in, I found my dad on the, he was on the ground, and I was like, what's happening right now? So I'm
Right.
trying to do like mouth to mouth, and like nothing's happening. And basically, long story short, like he passed away. And I'm like, what? Literally, I was with my dad maybe like 12 hours before that, like
Mhm.
right at his house. So like nothing, he wasn't coughing, it was nothing. So like it was just a lot. And I know I'm kind of rambling right now, but the story, it's all of it's just so unexpected and caught all of us off guard that we really didn't even know how to handle it at all. So, and I feel like I carry a lot of the that fire behind it because I was a kid that I was the last car ride my mom ever took. Like I was the last
Mm.
person to like see my mom well. And then I also was the last person to see my dad. And I also was the first person to find him. So like a lot of that kind of like weighs heavy on me even to this day. But to know like both of my parents died in the same year, months away from each other, one at the beginning of the month, one at the beginning of the year, and the other one at the end. It's still something that I still struggle with, and I like for a while I didn't even know how to. I didn't know how to use whatever this energy was. I just kind of
Mhm.
my life was just kind of on autopilot for a while. So that's like the story of how they passed, and yeah. So that kind of sent me in, sent me into a
Yeah.
whirlwind of emotions.
Yeah, it sounds
Yeah.
like, when you have higher orders of loss like that, and like as you kept saying that it's unexpected, like your parents weren't ill otherwise or chronically
Right.
ill or had some diagnosis or you weren't prepared.
Not at
No,
all.
nobody, even when it is this long drawn out process and you have, let's say, a loved one in hospice and you're everybody knows what's happening and everybody, is preparing themselves. Even that's hard, you
Right.
know, but when it comes out of the blue like that, I feel like the ground, like, beneath you, like, your world is shaken.
Yes.
Like, you're like,
Yes.
"Wait a second," like, something, like, perhaps what I would think, Bird, is that it's, like, your sense of security, like, that
Yeah.
in the root of it, like, in the core of your being, like, we have a core sense of what it is to be secure.
Yeah.
Like, that is just, like, thrown off, it's, like,
Yeah.
thrown off course, like, all of a
Yeah.
sudden, like, whatever was your foundation or
Isn't
your
anymore.
rock, it just kinda, like, collapsed,
Yeah. For
and you're
sure.
and you had no preparation for it.
Yeah. And what it feels like is that I'm just kind of, especially in the beginning, it felt like I was blowing in the wind. My family's really, really close. So it felt like I'm just tethering. That's
Yes.
exactly what it feels like. It just feels like I'm tethering, and I'm trying to reach for a hand, but nobody's out there to grab my hand to pull me back in. So I'm just like billowing.
Oh.
That's exactly what it, and it still feels like that sometimes.
Mhm.
But in the beginning, that's exactly what it felt like. I felt like nobody understood me except my brothers. Um, Most of my friends couldn't relate because they still had
Mhm.
their parents. And when it came to the father side of it, a lot of people aren't as well. A lot of my friends, well, some of my friends weren't as close to their father. So even if their fathers passed away, they didn't feel the way that I felt
Right,
because they
right.
didn't grow up in a certain household like we did. So, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of like that Tupac line, "My anger wouldn't let me feel for a stranger."
Stranger, yes,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And I'm the total opposite. I'm like, I was the only girl, and that was my,
You were really
So
close with your dad.
yeah, really close. And all of us we were just a really close family. I grew up in a two
Mm,
parent household, and my parents had been together since they were 20. I've never not known my parents to be together. You
right.
know, I've never seen them not married.
Mhm.
So, it's always been this core that we had. And
Like the
because
stability. Yeah.
yeah, and at the moment, I wasn't necessarily in a relationship. And my brothers, I have two brothers that are married. So like I also went through that phase alone.
Mhm, mhm.
And that is something that was tough because other things start to hit you. Like I don't have children. I wasn't in a relationship then. I'm not married. So it's like I am battling this thing. Trying to figure out, like, I'm navigating it absolutely by myself without, a shoulder to lean on outside of, my friends,
Mhm, mhm.
and my brothers. But, so that was tough. It was a lot of things I was kind of navigating in the beginning of this grief stage.
Well, you talked about this feeling of blowing in the wind. It's kind of interesting, and I think I know you touch on this in your show that you say it's about losing shit. Like you
Yep.
can have loss of loved ones, of life, your limb, of
Yep.
things, of titles. There's all sorts of grief.
Yeah.
Well, I'll share with you. There was a time in my life where I felt like the way that I could describe the feeling in my soul was that I imagined like 100-foot oak tree, like this really like I would say what is a foundation of you, of your life, and that was represented in this oak tree. Like,
Hmm.
and it was just very like it is ancient. Like to grow 100 feet tall, it had been on the planet longer than you and me and everybody we know.
Mm.
And then so you have this big tall tree, and then it being a deciduous tree, the leaves will come fall off and come back in the spring. Well, I imagine myself being like that very last leaf at the very tip top of this 100-foot oak tree, this ancient core of stability, of life, of knowing, of self, and just twisting in the wind on that little tiny like stem. Just like I felt like at any moment I was going to detach and I
Yeah.
would just be like in free fall.
Mm.
And it came to me from another aspect of losing or loss, if you will. And it wasn't of
Hmm.
my parents or like a very close loved one, but it's when I lost my faith.
Yes.
I used to be someone that was like I was baptized in a Baptist
Hmm.
church, and I had a core foundation of Christian
Yeah.
religion. And there was a time in my life when I began to question it. I
Yeah.
You know what? I'm gonna tell you exactly when it was, because I felt like my earth, like the core of my foundation or security or understanding was shaken. Um, when I was 21 years
Hmm.
old, I was in my final year of college, and I spent that year abroad. I went to West Africa to a country called
Hmm.
Ghana, to do an exchange program. During this exchange program, I spent like 6 months at the university as a student, and then I spent 6 months in the village working in rural health
Okay.
clinics. So this is the latter part of my studies, and I'm doing this for credit and life experience. But these are the final credits that I need to graduate college. And I start working in this rural health clinic in this town called Sogakope. So I don't have any medical background, but I'm just a student, and I'm working with the nurses and the other clinic people there. And this one afternoon, this man comes into the clinic with his little boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old. And the boy was very thin and cachectic, and he was vomiting what looked like these bright, fluffy billows of diseased matter. And it was really light and fluffy. Like when it landed on that dirt floor of that clinic, it just was like a fluff or a puff. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's lung tissue. Like
Oh
I
wow.
had enough wherewithal to understand a bit of anatomy. And this is before I went to medical school. So I was just like like the sponge absorbing all of it. And then there was this big frantic kerfuffle, in the clinic to try to save this little boy. Well, moments later, this little boy dies on the dirt floor of that
Oh my God.
rural clinic.
Oh wow.
And I
Oh
remember
wow.
I felt like if I could pinpoint a moment in time where I began to question what the fuck.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
I remember I was just
Yeah.
like, okay,
Like what the hell is happening? Why would this happen? How
yeah,
could you allow this to
just like you
happen?
said with your dad, and you're like, what's
Right.
happening here? You know what I mean? Like where you have those moments, you're like, something's not right. What is this?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so I I remember I became very reflective. Like, that hurt. Like I remember like that whole experience, I was like traumatized by it, for lack of a better word. And so I remember I left that clinic that day, and I went back to this like little hut place I was staying, and I was like, is this like I began to I began to ask, is there a God? Like
Mhm.
I was like, wait a second.
Yes.
I said, I don't understand
Yes.
life. I recognized that I didn't understand
Yeah.
anything. And I said, I like pondered that day, that clinic, that little boy. I pondered like the country. I saw poverty at a level I had never experienced in this
Mhm.
lifetime, in this community. Then I like literally pondered the continent, of Africa. I was like, wait, I said, I felt like I just had this big, like this time of like reflection. And then I pondered, I tell you, Bird, the whole of the world.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, this is not a world created by the God that I
Yes.
worshiped. How could this? I literally had no understanding. And then I began to question if, in fact, there was a God.
Yeah.
And that just set me on this trajectory of investigating my beliefs.
Mm.
Like, and all of it, and like, what am I? What are we doing here? Like, what's up with this little boy? Like I couldn't get it. I couldn't get it.
Yes.
And for about 10 years thereafter,
Mm.
I would say I struggled with my faith.
Mhm.
And so I just felt like that core security of what was my belief systems around my existence and nature and the world was shaken.
Mhm.
And I felt like that leaf at the very tip top of a 100-foot oak tree just twisting in the wind, and at any moment I could just detach. And
Yes.
then I there would be not, like I felt like I would fall into nothingness, like this endless abyss. And so
Mhm.
like part of me was like trying to hold on to some sort of belief system, and then the other part of me was like in free fall.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I don't, all the things that I thought were true are not true.
True. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have I don't know exactly how I don't want to say I know exactly
Mm-hmm.
how you feel, but I definitely went through that. And I actually have an episode called Losing Faith
Mm.
on Good Grief because I experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember talking to my friend, and excuse my language, but I was like, I'm not fucking with God anymore.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because one, like my mom was a pretty spiritual woman and she was a praying woman and and then my parents were just these like pillars in a community, and not in a sense of like having to be like a mayor or a political voice,
Mm-hmm.
but like
Mm-hmm.
they brought a spirit to a community that didn't have any.
Mm.
My parents like naturally changed people's lives. My mom could like pray for you, or my mom could give you that mothering that you were yearning for. And this, a lot of my friends to this day tells me that, like, man, your mom spoke to me in a way that I needed to be spoken to in that time.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad kind of like spoken to young men. So it was like this natural servitude that my family gave to like a community that lacked it. So when they were taken away to me, when they were taken away in such a lonely way, because in my head, both of them died alone, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
nobody was there with them. Yet they were a part of so many other people's lives. Like I was like, God, how could you allow this to happen to my parents, these type of people? And honestly, I started naming people that I was like, you could have took this, like this person could have died.
Right, right.
I know like 10 people that I could have gave you to die. Like I know some deadbeat dads out here that,
Right, right. People that
you
deserve
know,
it. Yeah.
people, in my head they deserved it. So um totally lost faith. Like I didn't believe, like the lower level, me vibrating on the lower level, did not believe that, like you said, like my God would allow anything like this to happen. And I'm grown, like I'm old enough to understand that all of us are going to pass away.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something, when you lose a parent, you turn into a 3-year-old. Like I'm losing daddy and mommy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Mm-hmm.
losing mother and father. I'm losing my daddy and my mommy. I'm losing the person that changed my diapers. I'm losing the person that birthed me.
Right.
And you kind of revert back to this very childlike feeling, and you feel very lost. I feel lost in my spirit because these are the people that taught me to be spiritual.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm losing faith in God because these are the people that introduced me to God. They were my gods in human form. So I didn't really understand how to cope with it. And yeah, like I totally lost faith. But what I will say is that there was always something like very deep down, like in the pit of my gut, that kind of kept me attached to God.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I was just very, very angry. And I like to say that it was my mom, because she prayed and all of this, and because she kind of like gave us tools to navigate certain difficulties, not necessarily this one, but she kind of helped us build our tool belt to navigate difficulties. So I was kind of able to still, like, my core was still attached to spirit.
Mm. Like it was like
And
an anchor a little
it
bit.
was an anchor for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, it was an anchor for sure. So I felt like I hated God, but I knew that I needed God,
Mm.
which was so hard for me to understand. And it's still to this day. Like to this
It's like
day,
a
it's still
love-hate
hard for me.
relationship. Yeah.
Right, right. Because I didn't have anything else to hold on to.
Right. I totally get you. I totally get you. It's kind of like, I mean, this is a euphemism, but it's like the devil, It's like, I don't like what's
Yes.
going on here, but we've been together
Yeah.
for a while, so
Yes.
I'm just gonna hold
Yes.
on to it, or
I'm just
like a
gonna hold
bad
on.
ex or something.
Like you pulled me out of a lot, so let me see. Like let me
Yeah.
see how this works. Yeah. So it's an interesting um it was interesting trying to either, and I'm still working on getting my faith completely back. I do know for sure that I can't go at it alone, and I do know for sure that I'm better with God than without God.
Mm.
Like I'm a better person believing in God than I am not believing for myself. Um, because without believing, I'm depressed, I'm sad, I'm negative, I'm on the ground, I am lackluster, I'm not achieving, I'm not doing.
Right.
But with God, at least I'm progressing in some way,
Mhm.
even if it's one little thing at a time. So I just hold on to that. Like I attach myself to that one thing. Like I know that I'm better with believing in God than I am not. So
Mm.
that's step one of me regaining my faith.
Well, I love that. I'm going to tell you, I mean, when I was a 21-year-old person first experiencing the world, I was completely like heartbroken,
Hmm.
when I began to witness it. Now, I am 52 now.
Yeah.
And so fast forward 30 years, I'm kind of I'm processing it differently,
Yeah.
and I'm noticing. So I don't know if you know this, but had a spiritual awakening in 2012 where I began leaving outside of my body and having out of body experiences.
Mm.
And so in that experiences, I felt like I was experiencing death. Like
Oh wow.
the way that I have described it is I feel like I've died 1,000 times.
Mm.
And when I was having those out of body experiences, I did it regularly. Like I had this very heavy like energy, like this levity of my energy for 7 years after my spiritual awakening. Before things kind of I felt like I fell back to earth again and I became more in my body. But there was
Did
a
this
time.
happen? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Did this happen while you were sleeping, or did it just happen during daily activities?
Okay, that's a good. I like it. So it came from okay, so there was a catalyst for it for sure.
Mhm.
So at that time in my life, I would say I was a profoundly sad person. Like I was woefully sad. And Bird, I could not put my finger on it because the way that I perceived happiness or where
Mhm.
success came from was all these achievements, was titles,
Yeah.
degrees, money, physical stuff, remodel kitchen, the Mercedes Benz in
Right.
the garage. But when I had all that stuff, like, family, kid, a husband and all that, I was like, I felt like all that stuff that I had worked so hard for my whole life to acquire, to achieve, to be, despite it, I still had this what I call this void inside of me, like this crevasse void, this emptiness of the soul.
Yeah.
And I did not know how to fill it. And so I got to the point where I was like, I'm not going to make it if I don't figure out what is going on with me, like what is happening inside of me, why I feel so sad and depressed all the time, then
Mm.
I'm out of here. Like I just felt like I wasn't going to make it.
Wow.
And so I think from that place of like searching for it was it actually if I could say it, it goes back to that shaking of my faith when I was that 21-year-old pre-med student
Mhm.
in that rural clinic where
Mhm.
since that point I had been seeking and searching and like
Yeah.
studying and introspecting. I had been doing the work trying to figure this shit out, trying to understand myself, trying to understand the
Yeah.
world, try to understand what this thing that I was fed, this God thing was. So I was like doing it, I was like studious and I
Mhm.
was I was like relentless in that pursuit. I never gave up on this desire to understand or to know who I was
Yeah.
and what's going on and why am I on this planet in the first place? What's going on the planet? And
Right.
so I think I would have these periods when I would literally ask those big questions like, what is this? LaTasha, I would literally drive down the 75 South. I used to work downtown in Midtown.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I would have this epiphany. I was like, what are we all doing? It's like I would see
Yeah.
people passing by me or sitting in traffic, and I said, nobody looks happy. Everybody's
Yeah.
just grinding it out. Everybody's just surviving. And I said, could this
Yeah.
be it? That we're
You're right.
all born into these very complex, these very brilliant bodies. And all we do while we are here is survive, like work and hustle to survive the embodiment. Like we're
Yes.
just trying to work to pay bills. I said, could this be all that we're here for? I would
Yes.
literally lose my shit. I was like, what?
Yes.
I was like, what the fuck? This makes no
Yes.
sense. Ugh. And so that's the state of being that I was
Yes.
in. And
Yeah.
so
Yes.
literally I was so sad, like in my soul. I would cry all the time. Like I would take a shower and I would just start weeping. I would go to bed at night and I would literally cry myself to sleep. And so
Mm.
one night, LaTasha, I lay down to sleep at night and I just prayed to go home. I was like, I don't know what home is, but it is. It's got to be not. It's not here. This isn't it.
Oh
Like I
wow.
felt something was just not right.
Oh
And then
wow.
on that night, I believe I was given the gift, and I call it the gift of awareness because I
Mm.
felt the energy, like I felt my energy leave my body like waves, like these energy waves coming out of my hands and feet.
Yeah.
And then I literally felt like I was in space or you know how in those Star Wars movies it looks like the starship is just kind of hovering. I'm sure it's moving, but it
Mhm.
kind of looks like it's kind of still. And they say, "Okay,
Yeah.
hyperspace," and they push some buttons and it goes zoom like through space. You just see stars, like flashing by. That's what it felt like. Like it wasn't me in a ship. It was me. It was like the energy of me, like
Yeah.
barreling through space at the speed of light. That's what that felt like. Like it was so
Mm.
fast I couldn't hold on. But that was my
Mm.
spirit. That was our spirit, I believe, is pure energy. It's light. And it travels like that. And like you
Yeah.
you said it a couple times in this interview, you said I had to lower my vibration. Like I
Yeah.
in this body, like to come into this body,
Yes.
I believe we have to lower our vibration. That
Yeah.
energy, that force, the essence that is us is pure light and love, and it is fast.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
faster than we can imagine, but we gotta also, like, be here, like, in the third dimension where time it feels like we're in the time construct, it feels like it's an eternity, you know? Like, the
Yeah.
day can seem like it's or a lifetime can feel like an eternity, where in the whole, I would say, expanse of the universe, it's just a blink of an eye. But it can
Yeah.
feel so long and hard and painful, right? These very
Yes.
lower energies and densities.
Yes.
And so anyway, I started doing that. And I thought, okay, this must mean I'm going to die soon, you know? Like like
Mm.
I've been like having gone head to head with the universe, like I'm out of here. I'm out of here. I can't, yeah, I'm leaving. What I literally was like at my wit ends. I was just I was at the end of it, my rope, and I didn't want to be here. And so
Yeah.
I realized that each time I went out, I changed, like something changed in me. And began seeing auras in people. I would say something was turned on or activated. Maybe a latent gene was turned on where I was so much more empathetic. I began to let go of these old grievances. These things that were
Mm.
hurting me from my childhood, all the blame, all the questions. I became quiet and still. I began to understand. I felt like I was given the gift to tap into higher realms of understanding. And I think when
Yeah.
you come into your conscious self, like your spirit self or your essence, that light that is you, that energy that is you, You are all
Mm.
knowing. You don't have any
Yep.
questions. You're just like, oh, this just is.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how I
Mm-hmm.
began to see the world and to like live in it. But I'm going to share something with you that I haven't spoken to anybody else. Um,
Oh wow.
but I think this is important for our listeners. In
Yeah.
this past week, I lost two family members, a brother and an uncle, like within a day of each other.
Oh
And
wow.
I've been listening as my extended family grieves. And I've been observing myself and my the way that I perceive now, which is in distinct contrast of that 21-year-old person in the bush clinic, was
Mm-hmm.
now I feel happy for the person that transcended. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, they're free." Like
Oh
like I
wow.
said, this earth life, I call it the cosmic kindergarten. And then
Mm.
they got to graduate. They got to move on, and I truly believe in like the core of my being that when we transition out of these heavy bodies, our frequency is no longer so low and we go into the light.
Mm.
Like I think there's something about religions talking about that, but what I think we don't understand is we are the light. Like it's not like a
Yes.
destination. It's you. It's like you become your true
Yes.
self. Like the essence of your true self. You get to experience that wholeness of love, that understanding, that peace about yourself again. You get to know who you really are, not the avatar and the embodiment that you've taken in this lifetime and all the
Yeah.
conditioning and
Yeah.
the cycles and the patterns and the belief systems.
Not the
Yeah.
representative.
It's like, I believe we're just all wearing these costumes, these very fancy costumes we call our body, and we put all types of meaning and what we are and what we aren't, and we're good enough, this enough, that enough, and we become
Right.
injured. It like injures our soul that says, wait a second, you are divine, you are light, you are the God
Mm-hmm.
that you're seeking. It's
Yes.
you,
Oh
it's
yes.
within you, it is you.
Yes.
And so
Yep.
it's kind of all that. And so now I kind of like threw all those stages of grief out, because for me, I'm not angry anymore. I'm not denying anything anymore. It's not even about acceptance. It's about the realization that this is temporary, and that
Mm.
what happens next, I think, is something to look forward to. And
Yeah.
at least I'm looking forward to it. Let me say that. Let me say that. And I think that there are different
Yeah.
cultures that process death differently than we do here in this our American Western culture. But I think there are other ways to perceive it. And it's the
Yeah.
perception that, to me, informs how we feel about it.
Yeah. I'm working on I actually like, I do like that perspective. And um I think like mid last year, uh I don't know what happened, but I ended up like pausing. It was like I would think I was at work one day, and I paused and thanked my younger self. I thanked
Mm,
my uh older, like my past self, for doing the
right,
work. Because oftentimes I don't think we do that, right? I don't think we look back on our 21, 22, 23. Say for instance, if you didn't decide to go to Ghana, if you didn't decide to study abroad, you wouldn't have had this perspective that you have now. I can guarantee that you wouldn't have had this
right,
perspective. But that 21-year-old who is still very much shaken to her core and went through all of these phases of grief and believing, it resulted in Dr. Susan,
right.
at this point with this beautiful perspective of life. And she did the work to discover some things, right? So I started to like thank myself for some of the work that I had done spiritually, um, and it was more experimental. It was more like, oh, this sounds cool, let me look this up, or oh, I want to try this, or I want to eat this, or I want to, and I started to understand like all of those things matter. Like all of those steps of spirituality matter when in the phase when I lost my faith, in the phase where I lost myself. But at the core, like I knew that I had the tools in my tool belt to like gain it back. I didn't know when it was gonna come back, and I still don't know how it's gonna like re how I'm gonna rediscover myself. But what I know for sure is that I still have those tools. So last year I ended up like thanking myself like, oh, thank you for doing whatever work that you were doing to get me here, because now I'm able to somewhat, I don't want to say come to grips with the loss of my parents, but I can say it now. I can also recognize when they're here. Like you saying, like the frequencies of our spirits are faster. And in the beginning, I didn't even feel my parents. Like when they left, I thought I was going to get this whole like, oh, I'm going to see my parents. I'm going to feel them, and I didn't have that. And that kind of fucked me up too, because you do all this work and you think, like I'm a person who believes in God and my parents are going to show up in my dreams.
Right.
And something happens, a couple things happened. They did show up, but one, I couldn't see them, or like either I could hear them and I couldn't see them, or vice versa. So that was the issue. But let me get back to the subject because I can start going on a tangent. But I just ended up, I just ended up feeling like, okay, I'm recognizing that they are here, they're with me, but they're in a different realm, and I'm accepting that now. And it was hard for me to accept in the beginning, but I know that the work that I did in my past allows me to recognize that this is just, like you said, this is just a very like one-dimensional plane. Like this plane doesn't compare to whatever other spiritual plane that we go to once we leave here. And I'm able to accept that part now. Am I able to accept the way that they passed away? No. Am I able to accept the feeling that I still sometimes have behind it? No, not at this moment. Do I know that I will? Definitely. Definitely. But I can accept the fact that I feel them spiritually. I reckon, like nowadays, first of all, I've seen, I don't know if you're like into like angel numbers. It's just certain things I just don't take as a coincidence anymore.
Yeah.
I was seeing like, 333, 222, 111, 444. Like I was seeing them a lot, even like maybe a year before my parents passed away. I seen them like almost every day. And then the year that both my parents passed away, I saw 555 like a few times. I saw 555 maybe like 2 days, actually, yeah, 2 days before my mom passed away, and I know like that means change. And then I saw it a couple of days before my dad passed away, and I also know that means change. So that was like, oh, what's happening? And now, I've been seeing 1111 and 111. This was happening all last year. And this year, I see angel numbers every day. But in January, I have this booklet. I have this photo book on the altar, on my mom and dad's altar. And it's been sitting there since, I put it up. And it's a picture of them, and it had been there for like a year and a half now. And I knew I kept seeing like 11:11. Like every time I looked at the clock, it was 111 or 11:11. I kept seeing it. So I ended up seeing like 11:11 one morning. And I was like, I keep seeing this number. Like, what is happening? And I walked in the room and I had seen this picture, but it never hit me. So I ended up looking up at the picture and it hit me then. Both of my parents had on the number 11 Falcons jersey. Yes, my dad had a number 11. My mom had a number 11. They're just standing right next to each other with 11:11. The very next picture is another number, another jersey, a totally different jersey with the number 11 on it that my dad has on. And I chose to believe like, oh, this is the way that you guys are communicating with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I've seen this picture so many times. I was with y'all. I actually was a person that took that picture.
Mhm.
Like I've seen this picture sitting up here for so long, but I didn't recognize it until I was like, what is happening? Like I asked for an answer and then I looked up and I was like, wait, is this y'all? Like
Mhm.
is this y'all communicating with me? And I'm saying all this to say, like, going back to what you were saying, recognizing that our spirit outweighs or outlives or outruns whatever phase that we are in right now is, for me, it's like it was a very pivotal moment because I was just able to recognize that my parents were able to show up for me in a way spiritually that they probably couldn't when they were here.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I don't know. I'm still working all of that out, but me coming to that realization
Mm.
helped. Like it's
Oh,
helping.
yeah.
Definitely helping.
And I love
Yeah.
what you said about thanking your younger self or your prior self.
Yeah.
And I was listening to this, um, I guess, little YouTube clip with Louise Hay, and I wasn't listening to the whole thing, but just like the little preview said, uh, when you look in the mirror, um, say that you love, tell yourself that you love yourself.
Mhm.
And she made a kind of like a little joke. She goes, "What? You like you don't do that already, or you can't, or you feel like you don't, And so she
Right.
kind of was like as a provocative type of question, and so she
Right.
just recommended looking in the mirror each day and telling yourself that you love you.
Yeah.
And she goes, little kids do it all the time. They're like, I love
Yep.
my pajamas. I love my socks. I love my underwear. I love my hair. I love my
Yes.
whatever. They
Yes.
love themselves. But as
Yeah.
we get older, we tend to look in the mirror and just see all the things that we don't like about ourselves.
Right.
Like we're hyper focused on that. And so I just said,
Yeah.
I said, let me look in the mirror and just try this exercise. And the first day that I looked in the mirror and I said, Susan, I could barely get the words out. I love you, because I realized I was beating myself up all the time. And
Mhm.
and I literally like noticed, like part of my spiritual work is I've been observing all of it and observing myself in particular. But I notice how freely and easily and honestly I tell my son I love him. I mean, like it's like butter off, on toast. It's like very
Yes.
smooth. There's no
Yeah.
hesitation, there's no disbelief. There's nothing. It's just love. But when it came to
Yeah.
myself, I was like, yeah, I was like, I don't know if I believe it.
It's a muscle,
Yeah.
right?
And so
Yeah.
I've been trying to exercise that muscle, as you say.
Yeah.
And part of it when I do that is like, like, because it's always like there's a but, it's like, I love you, but I wish this, or I want to
Mhm.
do that,
They're
or
always
yeah,
conditions.
it's like
There are always
conditional.
conditions
It's
attached to
conditional.
it.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I just, to me, like to overcome that part of me, I would say things like what I'm grateful for. So yeah, I might not
Yeah.
be like unconditionally in love with myself at this moment, but I am grateful for like just like you said, like the work that I've done that allows me to even take a moment to acknowledge myself.
Mhm.
Because I'm like, this
Mhm.
this body, has carried me through all manner of circumstance on this planet. It's strong,
It
and it's
is.
beautiful, and it's it's a part of me. It's not all of me, but it's a part of me.
Yeah, and we defied so many odds just to be human.
Exactly, just
You know?
exactly. It's like you won the lottery, but we just don't realize
You
it
won the
because this
lottery.
is so
You won the
hard. The
lottery.
world is hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wanted to touch
Yeah.
on one other thing that you talked about, and when you said after your parents passed, you had the expectation that you would feel them or see them or have this,
Yeah.
spiritual connection. And I think that's just it. I think we have to let go of the expectation. And
Yes.
when we let go of that and just say, you know what, I'm going to connect with my parents in any way that they see fit, or at
Yeah.
times, you know, I won't necessarily know in advance, but I'll know when they're there. Like just leave it open,
Yeah.
like to the best, in my best and highest good, like they're going to
Yeah.
show, or I know they're there. And when we
Yeah.
release the expectation, we're not disappointed.
Yeah. And also releasing the expectations of what you're supposed to be, or how long you're supposed to be grieving, or how long you're supposed to be feeling a
Or
certain way,
or being in a certain state.
or being in a
Yeah,
certain
like
state.
being in a certain circumstance. You're like, are we done with this shit?
Yep.
I want to move on. I'm ready to
Yes.
move on.
Yes.
But
Yes.
what you
Yeah.
think and perhaps what's more like what is required for your soul evolution may be very different. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I think that's another thing. It's like you feel like it's kind of like when you begin this process of transforming energy.
Yeah.
I haven't talked about this, so I'm just gonna like break it down and just say that I believe at the core of us, the core of all things in existence is energy. It's energy at its core. Even a rock or something you think is inanimate or doesn't move, if you go down to its basic building blocks, there's there's a electron circulating around a nucleus. Like
Mhm.
it's energy. And so I believe that's true with us as human beings and true of our spirits, our souls, or essence, or whatever you want to call it, or the seed
Mhm.
of our consciousness, whatever you want to call that thing. That
Yep.
is us. That it's energy too. And all energy on the planet follows the very first law of thermodynamics, which is the law of conservation. That energy cannot be created nor destroyed by us, but it must be changed or it must be
And
transformed.
transferred.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's the only way to change. Like, if you say, I'm feeling grief or sadness or depression or guilt or shame, the only way to change that energetic essence of you is to transform that energy. You can't forget
Yes.
about it. You can't get rid of it. You can't
It's not going
Yeah, you can't
anywhere.
numb yourself from it or distract
Yeah.
yourself from it for too long, because there it is. Wherever you are, there it is. It's with you, it's within you, it's a part of you. And so the idea
Yes.
is that we have, I believe, a part of our journey, what I came, to realize from those times driving down the freeway saying, what's WTF? Nobody's happy. What's going on here? This
Right.
can't be all we're here for. It's just to survive our embodiment. Is that we're also here to transform those very densest energies that are carried over into this lifetime. Those
Yeah.
those energies we call our feelings, and
Yeah.
so that's all energy. Your thoughts are energy, just like when you
Mhm.
think about how you love someone or how you don't, how that energy is transferred, and people pick up on that. Just like you pick up on it
Yes.
when you feel loved or when you feel thought of or when you feel unloved. You're like, that
Yep.
person's got it out for me. They may not say anything.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't do anything, but you just got a feeling. That's the energetic
Yep.
transfer of that. That's how
Yeah.
powerful we are as beings.
I ended up recognizing this, and I know I don't want us to go over time, but I ended up recognizing that last year I went on sabbatical last year for 6 weeks. I lived in Indonesia
Mm-hmm.
for like a month and a half. Like everything just felt heavy over here. My home didn't feel like home. You know, Atlanta didn't feel homey to me. I felt alone. I felt like the world was kind of caving in. So I was like, I need to leave. So I ended up going to Indonesia, and my first 2 weeks I spent in this like remote village. Like it wasn't the Ubuds or, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't the Instagram Indonesia. It wasn't the Instagram Bali at all. I was definitely the only black person in that village. I was the only person of from another country in that
Mm-hmm.
village. So, um, but I recognize that one, all humans are this at the core are the
Mm-hmm.
same
Mm-hmm.
and what we want. Like we just want love, peace, happiness. We want our families and all that stuff. But I also recognize that when you shift, even when you shift environments, your body naturally recharges itself.
Mm, mm,
And like I went through I went through grief over there I experienced grief over there in a different way than I experienced it over here. It was like you were saying, like the energy of grief was still very much with me, but the way that I was experiencing it, because this particular part of the world is very spiritual in the way that they handle death,
mm-hmm,
in the way that they handle living, in the way that they give to the earth,
mm-hmm,
right? Um that my energy shifted because I started to adapt to the way that they were doing things spiritually. In the mornings, they pray. At 12, they stop working. They start, like anytime they drive over a bridge, they honk to the waters and say, thank you.
mm,
Hey, water. Hey, Mother Nature. I'm crossing over your barriers. Thank you for keeping me safe. So, like, there's a different interaction that they're having with the natural world and the spirit world on a day to day basis, which changes their energy
mm,
on the way that they view things. So, being over there, it was even like just 2 or 3 weeks being over there, I started to slowly just adapt to things, right? And I remember getting this epiphany, because I'm thinking like, oh, I'm over here, I'm going to have this huge spiritual awakening, and in my head this is all that was going to happen, right? And it didn't happen that way. What kept coming to me was like, in order to be clear, you have to be cleared, right? And I kept asking for like clarity, right? Because I felt so foggy. And it was like once a day I kept hearing, in order to be clear, you have to be cleared, meaning like all of those things that you are attached to, all of those things that you're giving energy to, whether it be the food that you're eating, whether it was the entertainment that I was digesting, whether it was the social media that I kept going to, like I won't be able to get whatever I won't be able. I was not going to be able to shift energies until I let some other energies go.
mm-hmm,
And once I did that, like I went on like this 10-day fast, like social media. I stopped eating sugar while I was in. I did it while I was over there. I stopped eating sugar, or processed foods, and something else that I did. And like I made sure that I prayed, like I journaled and prayed every day. And these are things that you can do easily, but for some reason, like it transformed my energy, and I was breathing better. Like inflammation in my body, like I saw it happening in real time. It felt like I saw the inflammation in my body start to reduce.
mm-hmm,
Like it wasn't any like brain fog. Was the grief still with me? Very much so. But the way that I was using that energy was totally different.
mm,
And that when I recognized it, I was like, you know what? I was like, you know what? This is something that I need to like take back with me.
mm-hmm,
But it's
mm-hmm.
crazy how you can like revert back to your old self very
Very
fast.
quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, very quickly. But it's something now that I know for sure that it works like that. The energy of your environment can change everything about the way that you grieve, the way that you see the world, and the way that you show up in the world. Sometimes you just have to go. Sometimes you just have to move away. Sometimes you just have to like change your environment
Mm-hmm,
to just get a better perspective. So I was saying all that to say that I totally agree about like energy being transferred, and you having to like show up in a different way in order to use that energy in order to like let other things go, because that's exactly what happened to me.
mm.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, as you said earlier, once you know what to do or you have the tools, you can always go back to it. And so
Right.
it's just like another tool in your spiritual box, that you
Mm-hmm.
can draw upon. But yeah, I would say it's not an easy task to, I would say, hold your vibration. I mean,
Yeah.
just think of every emotion that you have, everything that you call a feeling has its own vibrational resonance. And how many of those that you fluctuate through on a daily basis and moment to moment.
Yeah.
You can be doing fine, and then some text message comes over or an email you don't want to see, and then your energy's in the dumpster, and then you laugh and see something on TV, or you get something, an ice cream cone, and your energy's up again. Whatever, it's like all over the place.
Mhm.
And I think one of the
Mhm.
things that I'll close here and say is that all of those things are allowed. Like that's all a part of you. It's not like, oh, I'm this is bad energy and this is good energy. It's like, no, these are just the vibrations. These are just the frequencies that I'm
Yeah.
capable of experiencing. And so you ask
Yes.
yourself, what do I want to experience more of? And what do I want to experience less of? And I think the idea is we want to
Yeah.
experience more love, more joy, more peace about ourselves, more happiness, more, I would say, compassion and acceptance, those things. And those lower
Yes.
energies that feel like a ton of bricks in your gut, like the anger, the fear, the hate, and all that, the guilt, the shame. I can still feel them, and there are things certainly to be disgusted about, and there's certainly things that you know, one could argue you should be ashamed of, or feel shame about.
Mhm.
Like it's very
Yeah.
natural. But you don't want to live there, right? You want to live in your higher frequency vibrations. And I
Right.
think that's what comes with this type of conscious awareness is that you actually you can experience more of the higher vibrations of you or that higher self than the lower self on the day-to-day basis. And a lot of it is about
Yeah.
how you perceive life and as you said, sometimes that change in environment is a change in your inner environment, like what's going on in your
Yes.
mind, what's going on in your
Yes.
heart, what are you doing. I mean, yes, it's about your physical too. Sometimes you need to shift that, but what about the inner environment? Like that, it's pretty hostile for most of us. And I would argue
Yep.
most of us don't even like ourselves very much. And so that's why we intoxicate ourselves and distract ourselves and numb ourselves and harm ourselves because we don't like, there's all this energy in us that we don't really like it. We don't like feeling it. We don't like that that's a part of us. So I think it's like accepting that we all, as a human, part of the gift of it all is that you have the capacity to feel all of it, but the
Mhm.
idea is like, where do you want to live? Like where in your day to day life, what vibrations, what frequencies do you want to exist at? And that is a whole. To me, that's just the work. That's the whole thing is like figuring out how can I be vibrationally high, even though my
Yeah.
circumstances have a tendency to kick me into those lower energies. Yeah, and
Yeah.
how can you still? And to me, it's then it comes down to how do you perceive it. And so, like,
Yep.
I do a lot of work in the realm of poverty, breaking cycles of poverty. And there's a way of looking at it. You say, well, gee, I don't have this, I don't have that. And so that's the energy of lack. And so when you feel
Yes.
scarcity and
Yes.
lack, then you feel like shit, you feel awful and you wonder what's wrong with you and you're angry and all this stuff. But then you can have that same
Yeah.
circumstance where there's things that you would like to experience or have that aren't there yet. And then you can look at it, perceive it differently and say, well, what do I have? Come into an energy of gratitude and knowing, that, yeah, something hasn't shown up in my reality yet, but it's possible for me. Like leave that place for the possibility
Yeah.
of it, no matter what it is. And so when you live your life like that, yeah, the circumstances may say this, but the frequency and the vibration of you says, okay, I I guess in many ways I accept it. It just is. It's not good or bad. It just is. And then you
Mhm.
can focus your energy on ways to shift it and get and change it. You know, shift out of
Yep.
it.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Well, Miss LaTasha, Auntie Bird, this has been a wonderful hour. I would love it if you could share with our audience if you have any closing remarks or how they can get in touch with you. What's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. This was amazing. You're actually the first podcast that I've been a guest on, so talking about grief, so I
Oh,
appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Yeah, no problem. But you guys can follow my podcast on social media at Good Grief Bird. You also can find me on YouTube at Good Grief Bird. We're on all platforms. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. You can listen to that and just search and subscribe and follow and like and leave a 5-star review for a good grief with Auntie Bird. The podcast about losing shit. So if you want to follow me personally, you can follow me on social media at Auntie Bird as well. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate this.
Well, thank you. It has been a great pleasure.
You too.
Interested in giving Magic Mind a try? For a limited time, you can get up to 48% off your first subscription or 20% off one-time purchases with code BeConscious20 at checkout. You can claim it at www.magicmind.com/BeConscious20. Find the link in the show notes. I want to thank you for taking this inner journey with us today. And whether you are coming or going, looking inside or out, remember to be conscious. If you love this episode, and if today's message resonated with you, please subscribe, rate, and review the Be Conscious podcast. This helps listeners just like you find intriguing and informative content. I also want to know what inspired you and what conscious topics you'd like to hear more about. And if you want, you can share those thoughts and questions with me at info@susannicholas.org.
Thanks for listening to the Be Conscious podcast with author, TEDx international speaker, and conscious coach, Dr. Susan Nicholas. Be sure to connect with her to stay up to date with her latest news and works. Learn more about her conscious speaking platform at susannicholas.org/speaking. Stay tuned for the next thought-provoking episode. And whether you are coming or going, looking inside or out, remember to be conscious.